I'm Tessa Butler, and if you'd met me on the street, you'd probably see someone who's calm, collected, and maybe a little too serious. At 38, I'm a forensic accountant, a job that demands precision, patience, and a relentless eye for detail. For 15 years, I've been quietly holding our family's financial chaos together, like the invisible thread weaving through a tapestry no one truly notices until it unravels. I'm good at numbers, spreadsheets, and making sense of messes most people don't even want to look at. But when it comes to family, my work often feels unrecognized, invisible, like a background hum that no one wants to acknowledge. I live a comfortable life with my husband, Daniel, who's steady in all the ways I need him to be, supportive, patient, and understanding. We've built a little sanctuary away from the noise of the world, but no matter how perfect our bubble feels, the shadow of family expectations and old wounds creeps in every year at Thanksgiving. Family gatherings are never simple. They're a minefield of unspoken resentments and carefully veiled judgments. Last Thanksgiving, the usual warmth of the holiday was pierced by a moment I still replay in my mind. We sat around the dining table, the scent of roasted turkey and cinnamon filling the air, laughter mingling with the clinking of cutlery. Mom, the matriarch with a magnetic presence, made a comment that cut deeper than any harsh word could. "Your sister is twice the woman you'll ever be." The words weren't loud, but they echoed in the room, hanging there like a challenge. Sarah, my older sister, smiled with that self-satisfied smirk she wears when she's certain of her place in Mom's favor. Dad shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact, maybe sensing the tension but too unwilling to step in. I smiled back, sipped my water, and kept the peace, because I've learned that sometimes silence is the safest weapon. But inside, a storm brewed. That phrase, "twice the woman," felt like a verdict on my worth, a public dismissal of everything I've sacrificed and endured. I've spent years being the family's financial backbone, quietly stepping in to cover crises and keep things afloat. I've watched Sarah take center stage, basking in Mom's praise and the family's adoration, while my contributions were footnotes, if acknowledged at all. What they don't see, what I've never spoken aloud, is the $80,000 secret hidden beneath the surface, a debt I quietly covered for Sarah's wedding when her fiancé vanished, leaving her stranded. That money was more than just dollars. It was my trust, my hope for family unity, and my silent act of love. But instead of gratitude or acknowledgement, I was met with indifference, sometimes even disdain. That night, as the family laughter resumed and the conversation shifted to lighter topics, I sat there, watching, listening, calculating. I wondered how many more times I'd swallow my pride, how long I could keep pretending that everything was fine. The polished image of the perfect family dinner, with its carefully arranged plates and festive decorations, masked the fractures beneath. And I knew, deep down, that this Thanksgiving was just another chapter in a story that had been playing out for years. A story where I was the overlooked sister, the quiet enabler, the invisible accountant balancing not just books, but decades of unspoken pain. But I also knew something else. That $80,000 secret wasn't just a number on a spreadsheet anymore. It was a key that could unlock truths and unravel the carefully maintained illusions of my family's perfect image. And I was holding it, waiting. Favoritism wasn't something that crept in slowly or subtly for me. It was stamped on my life from the very beginning, like a birthmark I couldn't erase. From the earliest memories I have, Sarah was the golden child, the one who glittered effortlessly in the spotlight Mom so eagerly shone upon her. She had this natural brilliance that everyone admired, top grades in school, an effortless charm at every family gathering, the kind of charisma that made neighbors and relatives gush about how lucky Mom was to have such a daughter. Meanwhile, I was quietly tucked away in the background, the responsible one, the dutiful daughter who didn't make waves or demand attention. Mom's praise was as clear as day, but always reserved for Sarah. I can still hear her words echoing in my mind. "Sarah's so gifted, so smart, so poised. She's going to make such a mark in this world." Meanwhile, when it came to me, compliments were more like backhanded acknowledgments. "Tessa's practical, always reliable," she'd say, as if practicality was a consolation prize. I learned early on that Mom didn't value quiet responsibility as much as she did dazzling achievement or social grace. I wasn't the one getting standing ovations at school plays or cheers at family reunions. Instead, I was the girl who made sure the bills were paid, who remembered appointments and kept schedules, who fixed problems nobody else wanted to touch. The divide wasn't just in words. It was in the way decisions were made, the way invitations were extended, the way attention was doled out. I remember countless moments when I was left out of plans or conversations that were somehow Sarah's domain. Birthdays, holidays, even vacations sometimes happened without me. Or when I was there, I was treated like an afterthought. Once, when Sarah was planning her high school graduation trip, Mom spent hours on the phone with travel agents, discussing every detail. I offered to help, but my suggestions were politely ignored. "This is Sarah's moment," Mom said. "You just need to let her have it." And I did. I stepped back, pretending it didn't hurt. Even family gatherings reinforced the hierarchy. Sarah was always seated in the prime spot at the dinner table, the one closest to Mom. I got the seat near Dad, who was quiet and gentle but never quite a shield for me. At holidays, Mom would ask Sarah about her latest achievements, her social life, her dreams. To me, she'd offer a nod or a brief, "How's work, dear?" that felt more like a formality than genuine interest. The message was clear. Sarah's life was the one worth celebrating, while mine was just something to keep running smoothly in the background. I tried to rationalize it for years. Maybe Mom was just proud in different ways. Maybe Sarah's extroverted personality naturally drew more attention. Maybe family love was complicated. And this was just how it looked from the outside. But inside, a quiet ache grew, a feeling of being less than, of existing only to serve as the foundation for someone else's spotlight. I remember lying awake at night, wondering why my efforts never seemed to matter, why my successes were met with polite applause rather than genuine pride. This favoritism shaped not only how my family saw me, but how I saw myself. I absorbed the message that I was the quiet, responsible one, the backup plan, the one who held things together but wasn't meant to shine. It became a role I played so well that I nearly forgot what it felt like to be truly seen. The affection I longed for was always just out of reach, replaced by expectations and obligations. My sense of identity was entangled with making life easier for everyone else, particularly Sarah, who seemed to glide through life on the waves of Mom's unwavering support. Even as an adult, this dynamic persisted. Family decisions, celebrations, and inheritances all seemed to circle around Sarah, as if her place at the center was a given, unquestioned and eternal. I was expected to manage the practicalities, to fix problems quietly, and to accept that my role was supporting rather than leading. The emotional wounds of exclusion and unequal treatment layered upon years of sacrifice and unspoken resentment, creating a silent storm beneath the family's polished surface. Looking back, I realize now that the roots of our family dysfunction run deep. The favoritism that shaped my childhood didn't just influence my relationship with Sarah and Mom. It dictated the entire rhythm of our lives, breeding resentment and misunderstanding. It's no wonder that at Thanksgiving, when Mom declared Sarah, "twice the woman I'll ever be," the words felt like a confirmation of everything I had long suspected, but never dared to say. It was a phrase that echoed decades of exclusion, a verbal dagger wrapped in holiday cheer. But beneath those years of quiet suffering, I was storing up a truth, a secret about the real cost of that favoritism. And I was beginning to see that being twice the woman in their eyes didn't mean what I thought it meant at all. I've always believed that actions speak louder than words, especially in a family where words often felt hollow or loaded with hidden meanings. So I poured myself into proving my worth through sacrifices, quiet, steady, and often invisible sacrifices, the kind no one asked for but everyone benefited from. Take Sarah's wedding, for example. That was the moment that tested the fragile threads holding our family together. I was supposed to be a sister who celebrated, who cheered her on as she walked down the aisle, a day of joy and promise. But the reality was far more complicated. Her fiancé disappeared, literally vanished, just weeks before the wedding. No explanations, no goodbyes, nothing. Sarah was devastated, stranded, and suddenly the financial burden of the wedding fell on her shoulders. But even that wasn't entirely true, because I stepped in, quietly, without a word to anyone except Daniel. I covered the $80,000 cost of that wedding. The venue, the caterers, the dress, the last-minute travel arrangements. I paid it all. It wasn't just money. It was my trust in Sarah, and my hope that family could pull through a crisis together. I didn't expect thanks or fanfare. I just wanted to protect the day, to keep the family intact, to be the calm in the storm. I told myself it was what sisters did. But looking back, I realize how much of that burden I carried alone, like an invisible weight pressing on me every time Sarah smiled and the family congratulated her on a perfect wedding. That wasn't the only time I stepped in. I've helped patch up crises that no one else wanted to touch. Medical bills when Dad's health took a turn for the worse. Emergency car repairs. Unexpected expenses that Sarah or Mom couldn't or wouldn't handle. I became the family's unofficial accountant and bailout person, the one who balanced their chaos while they went on with their lives. Even Daniel, patient and steady as he is, sometimes expressed concern. "Tess, you're giving too much," he'd say softly on quiet nights when the house was still. "You're not their ATM." But I brushed it off, convincing myself that family was supposed to be like this, complicated, demanding, and sometimes ungrateful. I convinced myself that my sacrifices were investments in family love, even when the returns were invisible. My career took a backseat too. I turned down promotions that would have meant more travel, longer hours, less stability. It was a conscious choice to keep our family peaceful, to avoid rocking the boat that was already barely afloat. Daniel understood, though part of him worried I was losing myself. But I believed that if I kept giving, kept being the dependable one, someday, somehow, they'd recognize me, not just as the money woman or the fixer, but as their daughter and sister. But Sarah and Mom never acknowledged any of it. Their thanks were thin, their gratitude half-hearted or absent. Sarah's smiles were often patronizing, as if my help was expected, owed. Mom's approval was reserved for Sarah's achievements and social graces, never for the quiet labor of financial rescue or emotional steadiness. I was invisible in the spotlight, a shadow behind the curtain, caught in the role of caretaker and silent supporter. Yet, I held on to hope that one day, the scales would tip, that my sacrifices would matter beyond the ledger of dollars and cents. That family would see me, not just the help I provided, but the person I was. Maybe that hope was naive, or maybe it was simply what kept me going. In those moments when I watched Sarah laugh and be praised, when Mom's eyes gleamed with pride solely for her, I swallowed the sting, because I wanted peace, I wanted love, and I wanted to believe that my worth wasn't defined by applause, but by the quiet acts of love I could offer. But the truth was settling in slowly, like a shadow creeping across the floor. Sometimes love isn't enough when it's one-sided. Sometimes sacrifices don't earn respect, they just earn expectation. And sometimes the family you build with your own hands can be the very one that takes you for granted. That Thanksgiving, as I sat at the table and Mom's words cut through the chatter, I realized that my sacrifices, my quiet devotion, were invisible not just to them, but to the narrative they told themselves about who mattered most. The $80,000 I covered for Sarah's wedding was more than a secret debt. It was a testament to the gulf between what I gave and what I received. And that realization was just the beginning. Last Thanksgiving, the room was buzzing with the usual mix of warmth and tension that had become so familiar over the years. The dining room smelled richly of roasted turkey, sage, and buttery mashed potatoes, the kind of smells that are supposed to mean comfort and family. The table was set perfectly, the centerpiece vibrant with autumn leaves and candles casting a gentle flicker on everyone's faces. Laughter bounced around the room as relatives exchanged stories and jokes, creating a soundtrack that, for anyone outside, might have looked like a picture-perfect family gathering. But beneath the surface, the quiet undercurrent of resentment pulsed stronger than ever for me. We had just finished passing around the pumpkin pie when Mom leaned back in her chair, a sly smile playing on her lips. Everyone had just taken a breath, waiting for the next round of small talk, when she suddenly said, without warning, "You know, Your sister Sarah is twice the woman you'll ever be. The words landed like a stone thrown into a still pond, rippling through the room and distorting everything for me in that instant. It wasn't shouted, but it didn't have to be. The quiet certainty in Mom's voice cut sharper than any raised voice ever could. I felt my fork freeze halfway to my mouth, the warmth of the room suddenly turning cold. I glanced at Sarah. There she was, smiling, that smug, almost triumphant smirk that always artfully balanced pride and superiority. Her eyes sparkled with the unspoken message, "I'm the favorite, and you're just background noise." Dad, sitting next to Mom, shifted in his seat uncomfortably. His face turned away, his gaze dropping to his plate as if avoiding the inevitable fallout. I could almost hear the silent plea in his posture. "Don't rock the boat. Don't make this worse." But the damage was done. I forced a smile, the kind that barely touched my eyes, and took a slow, deliberate sip from my glass of water. I wanted to respond, to defend myself, to shout that I was more than a shadow behind Sarah's spotlight, but I held back. Years of conditioning had taught me that in these moments, silence was the safest weapon. I didn't want to escalate the drama. I didn't trust my voice not to betray the ache building inside me. So I swallowed the bitterness, along with the water, and nodded politely, keeping the peace as the world tilted. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Laughter and conversation, which had briefly stopped, began to pick up again, as if everyone was desperate to sweep that moment under the rug. But inside me, the words echoed louder than ever. "Twice the woman you'll ever be." It was more than just favoritism disguised as a compliment. It was a verdict, a public dismissal of my entire existence in their eyes. I thought about everything I'd done for this family, the years I'd quietly bailed out Sarah when her plans fell apart, including the $80,000 I'd spent on her wedding after her fiancé disappeared without a trace, how I'd covered Dad's medical bills, handled unexpected expenses, and managed family crises while keeping my own dreams on hold. None of that mattered in that moment. I was just the sister who paled in comparison, the one whose worth was measured against Sarah's charm and Mom's glowing approval. Sarah caught my eye briefly, and I saw that glint of triumph again, as if Mom's words had confirmed a hierarchy I was expected to accept without question. There was no gratitude, no acknowledgement, just smug satisfaction and entitlement. Dad's a gentleman, always avoiding conflict, but I could see the discomfort tighten his jaw. He looked away again, perhaps questioning what to say, or maybe just wishing the moment would pass. But I couldn't let it pass. The sting was too sharp, too familiar. It dug beneath my calm exterior and settled deep in my chest. The rest of the evening unfolded around that moment. Conversations carried on, jokes were told, and the family clinked glasses in toasts to health and happiness. But for me, everything felt fractured. The polished image of the perfect holiday dinner was just a thin veneer covering years of silent exclusion and emotional neglect. I sat there, watching, listening, feeling the weight of those words settle like a stone in my gut. The phrase, "twice the woman you'll ever be," wasn't just an insult. It was a confirmation of a painful truth I'd been trying to ignore. It underscored the invisible lines drawn between me and the rest of the family, lines I'd crossed again and again with sacrifices they never saw. That night, beneath the laughter and the clinking of silverware, I made a quiet vow. I wouldn't always be the invisible one, the family's financial crutch, or the overlooked daughter. There was a secret I carried, one that could unravel everything they thought they knew about family, loyalty, and sacrifice. And I was holding on to it tightly, waiting for the right moment to let it speak. But for now, the room returned to its festive rhythm, unaware that beneath my calm surface, a storm was gathering, one that would change everything. The moment I found out Sarah had never repaid the $80,000 I lent her for her wedding, it was like a cold jolt running straight through me. I had kept the accounts clean, every transfer tracked meticulously in my ledger, every promise she made logged in text messages and emails. Over the months after the wedding, I watched the balance remain untouched, the debt silently growing heavier in my mind. Each time she dodged the subject or changed the conversation, I swallowed the rising knot in my throat. I told myself to be patient, to trust her promise that she'd pay me back soon, but soon turned into months, then years. That secret debt was the invisible anchor holding me down under the surface of our family's polished facade. I was the one who had taken the financial hit, who sacrificed my own savings and postponed dreams to cover a crisis that wasn't mine. Sarah's glamorous wedding, the one everyone admired and still gushed about, was built on my hidden sacrifice. And yet, no one, not Mom, not Sarah, not anyone, ever acknowledged it. This wasn't just about money. It was about trust, respect, and the deep unfairness of being sidelined while my generosity was exploited. The worst part was what happened after I confronted Mom privately about it. I had hoped for understanding or support, maybe even some shared sense of fairness. Instead, I was met with a sneer, barely disguised as amusement. "You're throwing money away on a lost cause," she whispered as if it were the funniest joke in the world. Her words stung worse than any public insult, because they came from the person who should have known better. Mom mocked me for being foolish to believe Sarah would ever repay me, dismissing my sacrifices as pointless. That moment fractured something inside me. I realized how little they valued me, not just as a sister or daughter, but as a person with boundaries and limits. It was the final proof that my hope for recognition was a one-sided illusion. I was the family's silent bank, their crisis manager, and their emotional punching bag, and they took it all for granted. The next Thanksgiving, the air was thick with the usual forced civility, the clinking of cutlery and polite conversation masking the tension simmering beneath. After Mom's infamous comment about Sarah being twice the woman I'll ever be, I felt a surge of cold resolve welling up. I took a slow, deliberate breath, steadied my voice, and laid the truth on the table, not just figuratively, but with the weight of facts and figures that could no longer be ignored. "Since we're speaking about who's really carrying the family," I said quietly but firmly, "maybe it's time to remember that I covered Sarah's wedding costs. $80,000 that she still hasn't paid back." The room froze instantly. The laughter died in their throats, and even the clatter of forks and knives seemed to pause. Eyes darted around, searching for some way to deflect or deny. But the numbers hung in the air like a challenge. Dad nearly choked on his turkey, coughing so hard he had to reach for his water glass. His face paled, and I saw that flicker of helplessness I'd watched so many times before. Sarah's confident smirk evaporated, replaced by a tight, pale mask. She avoided looking at me, as if admitting the debt out loud was humiliating in a way I had never intended but deeply understood. Mom's expression shifted from smug superiority to something like panic. For a moment, she was speechless, and then she muttered something under her breath, too quiet for anyone else to catch. I caught the edge of bitterness in her tone, the same sneer I remembered from our private conversation. Meanwhile, Daniel's eyes met mine across the table, steady and unwavering. His silent support was a lifeline, reminding me that I wasn't alone in this. He reached out and squeezed my hand under the table, grounding me when the room's atmosphere turned icy. No one knew what to say. The perfect image of our family, meticulously maintained for decades, had cracked wide open. My $80,000 secret wasn't just a number anymore. It was the key to exposing the truth beneath the smiles and staged celebrations. That night, as voices hesitated and the room held its breath, I realized something profound was shifting. I was no longer willing to carry the weight of their indifference quietly. The story they told themselves about family, love, and sacrifice was about to be rewritten. Grief is a peculiar thing. It doesn't always come in the form of tears or loud sobs. Sometimes it arrives as a cold, heavy silence that settles deep inside your chest, tightening with every beat of your heart. That's exactly what happened to me in the days and weeks following that Thanksgiving dinner, the one where my mother's words hung in the air like a blade, slicing through the careful facade we all maintained. I wasn't crying out loud, but inside, something had died. The hope that my sacrifices would ever be recognized, the belief that love alone would bridge the chasms in our family, and the illusion that I was just the quiet, responsible one who mattered in her own right. For years, I had been the family's financial safety net, their quiet rescuer in emergencies no one else wanted to face. I was the one who balanced spreadsheets, negotiated with creditors, and stayed up late calculating medical bills for Dad. I was the invisible force behind the scenes making sure life ran smoothly. Yet, no one thanked me for it. No one asked how I was doing or acknowledged the weight I carried. Instead, I was taken for granted. My acts of love reduced to obligations expected of me. That heavy, unearned burden was a bitter pill to swallow. The realization struck me harder than any insult or slight. My family didn't just fail to appreciate me, they actively dismissed me. The phrase, "twice the woman you'll ever be," wasn't just a cruel favorite child taunt. It was a verdict. It was a reminder that in their eyes, my worth was measured against my sister's shining image, and I fell tragically short. The grief was not soft or gentle. It was sharp and unforgiving, flooding me with a mix of sadness, anger, and exhaustion. I replayed every moment of the past, the weddings I helped pay for, the emergencies I covered, the silent tears I hid when no one was watching, and I saw it all for what it truly was, years of unreciprocated sacrifice. I wondered how I had fooled myself into believing that continuing to give would eventually earn me a place at the table, not just physically, but emotionally. More than anything, I felt profoundly sidelined, like a shadow cast on a bright stage. I was present but unseen, essential but invisible. The emotional exclusion was a quiet wound, one that no bandage of holiday cheer or family smiles could heal. I realized that my role was not just to support the family financially, but to absorb their dismissals, their favoritism, and their lack of respect without complaint. It was exhausting, and I was done pretending it wasn't. That cold clarity dawned slowly but unmistakably. I understood then that my hope for change, hope that Mom would see me as more than a backup plan, that Sarah would honor the debt and the trust I had extended, was misplaced. I had been waiting for a redemption that would never come. My sacrifices had been enabling selfishness, not inspiring gratitude. The more I gave, the more they took for granted. It was like waking from a long, numbing sleep. The fog lifted, and with it came a harsh truth. I owed them nothing. Not my money, not my time, not my emotional labor. The scales had been tipped for far too long, and I realized I had the power to reset them. This wasn't about revenge. It was about survival and self-respect. That $80,000 secret, the financial wound I'd nursed silently, became a symbol of everything that had been hidden beneath the surface. It was proof that my contributions were not just ignored, but exploited. Holding that secret felt like holding a detonator, an uncomfortable but necessary tool to expose the truth they refused to face. Yet in the midst of this awakening, I also felt a strange sense of liberation. The weight of trying to be everything to everyone lifted just a little. I was no longer willing to be the family's invisible accountant, the quiet, responsible one who never spoke up or set boundaries. It was time to stop being the silent enabler of a toxic dynamic. As the days passed, I began to see my family in sharper relief. Their entitlement, Mom's favoritism, Sarah's dependency. It was all interconnected, a cycle I had been trapped in for years. But now, I was stepping out of that cycle. I wasn't sure exactly what would happen next, but I knew I had to claim my worth and demand accountability. The family's story would have to change, and I was ready to write a new chapter. Still, the question lingered. How would they react when the invisible thread I'd held began to unravel? The tension between loyalty and justice hummed beneath my skin, a delicate balance I was preparing to tip. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. I couldn't keep carrying their burdens at the expense of my own peace. The grief had settled into resolve, and with that, the quiet storm inside me started to gather strength. The moment I decided to stop being the family's invisible safety net, I knew I had to approach this with the precision and calm that 15 years as a forensic accountant had drilled into me. Emotions were running high, but I couldn't let them cloud my judgment. This was no longer about silent sacrifice. It was about clarity, boundaries, and reclaiming my power. I started by taking a hard look at who depended on me, and how deeply. Sarah's lifestyle was the first glaring dependency. From the outside, she seemed effortlessly poised, living a life of social dinners, weekend getaways, and a house that whispered comfort and status. But beneath that polished surface, her financial reality was tethered tightly to me. I'd covered her wedding costs to the tune of $80,000, a debt she never repaid despite countless promises. Beyond the wedding, I'd repeatedly bailed her out of emergencies, credit card bills, car repairs, even last-minute travel expenses for work that she claimed was urgent. Every time she called, I'd quietly shift money around in my accounts, making sure she never missed a payment. I was her invisible lender, the safety net preventing her carefully curated world from unraveling. Then there was Mom. She wielded her charm and influence like a seasoned matriarch, but when it came to the logistics of Dad's medical bills and care, she leaned heavily on me. She rarely wanted to deal with the tedious details, the insurance claims, the doctor's invoices, the medication schedules. I became the manager of his healthcare finances, a role that demanded constant attention and emotional energy. I kept track of payments, negotiated with providers, and made sure nothing slipped through the cracks. Mom's reliance wasn't just practical. It was a way to avoid facing Dad's declining health head-on, a burden she subtly shifted onto me while maintaining the image of a composed family leader. Managing this delicate balance drained me, yet I was the one who ensured the bills were paid and the truth wasn't exposed. Dad himself depended on me in ways that went beyond finances. He was the quiet anchor in the family, usually avoiding conflict and retreating into his own world when tensions flared. But when things got difficult, health scares, family arguments, moments of vulnerability, he looked to me for steadiness. I was the voice of calm reassurance, the mediator who smoothed out rough edges so the family wouldn't completely fracture. I was his confidant, the one who understood the unspoken fears beneath his gentle demeanor. Holding that responsibility was both an honor and a heavy weight, one I carried silently while watching the family dynamics play out around me. With these dependencies mapped out, I began gathering the evidence I'd need to shift the balance. Every financial transaction related to Sarah's wedding, every loan I'd extended, every unpaid bill was meticulously documented in spreadsheets I updated in real time. I compiled emails and text messages where Sarah had promised repayment, but never followed through. For Dad's medical expenses, I organized folders with invoices, receipts, and insurance statements, proof of the countless hours I'd spent managing the chaos behind the scenes. But it wasn't just the numbers. I noted Mom's subtle manipulations and omissions, the way she praised Sarah openly but dismissed my efforts quietly, how she played the role of the nurturing matriarch while sidestepping responsibility. I recalled conversations where she mocked my sacrifices, labeling them as wasted efforts on a lost cause. I documented these moments as well, because I knew that to reclaim my power, I needed more than just facts. I needed to expose the emotional undercurrents that had kept me trapped. Recognizing the gravity of what I was about to do, I reached out to my lawyer. We updated my will, ensuring Sarah would no longer benefit from my estate unless she fulfilled her obligations. I secured my bank accounts, changing passwords and tightening access to prevent any more unauthorized withdrawals or financial entanglements. This was about protecting myself first and foremost. The family had taken my generosity for granted for too long. Now, it was time to make them accountable. Behind the scenes, I maintained my usual polite demeanor. To the outside world, and even to the family, I was still the calm, dependable Tessa, smiling at holiday dinners and answering calls with my usual measured tone. Nobody suspected the storm I was quietly building. I kept my plans to myself because I wanted to see how long they could go without me before the cracks started to show. This wasn't a reckless act of anger. It was a calculated step toward reclaiming my dignity. Every day, I reviewed the evidence, rehearsing what I would say, how I would say it, and when the time was right to reveal my hand. This was no longer about being a silent enabler. It was about setting clear boundaries and demanding respect, not just for the money I'd given, but for the woman I was beneath the label of quiet, responsible one. The more I prepared, the more I felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. Fear of shattering the fragile family facade, and exhilaration at finally taking control of my own narrative. This was a turning point, not just for me, but for all of us. The question was, would they rise to the challenge, or would they crumble under the weight of their own entitlement? I didn't know yet, but I was ready to find out. I started pulling back slowly, deliberately, like a surgeon easing the scalpel rather than a storm breaking loose all at once. It wasn't about drama or confrontation. It was about reclaiming control over my own life and finances, something I'd been too generous with for far too long. The first subtle change was declining Sarah's requests for emergencies. Those calls weren't really emergencies. They were routine expenses dressed up as crises, car repairs that could wait, last-minute bills for events she decided to throw, or impulsive shopping sprees disguised under stress. Before, I'd answer every call with a quiet, "Okay, I'll handle it," shifting money around in my accounts to cover her debts without a word. But now, I started saying no. It was awkward at first. I'd explain, "I'm sorry, Sarah, I can't help this time," and brace myself for the guilt trip or the silent treatment that followed. But I held firm. The lines were drawn. Next, I stopped co-signing any loans or credit applications she asked me to back. For years, I'd been her invisible guarantor, the one who made her financial risks palatable to banks and credit card companies. Without my name attached, I knew she'd struggle to get approval. I'm not proud of using this as leverage, but it was necessary. I needed her to understand that the safety net was no longer there. Every time she asked, I repeated my stance calmly but resolutely. "I'm not going to put my credit on the line anymore. You need to manage your own finances." It was a phrase I never thought I'd have to say to my own sister, but the dynamic had shifted. I was no longer the fallback. To reinforce this distance, I began avoiding family calls that were mostly about financial favors or emotional manipulation. Mom was notorious for calling at odd hours, her voice sweet but laced with passive-aggressive jabs or emotional guilt trips. "Tess, dear, can you just help with Dad's bills this month? It's a bit tight." Or, "You know how Sarah's situation is. She really needs a hand." I used to answer quickly, reassuring them that everything was handled behind the scenes while silently resenting the weight of these demands. Now, I let some calls go straight to voicemail, returned others only with brief, non-committal replies, and sometimes didn't return calls at all. The silence was deafening to them, but for me, it was a breath of fresh air, a boundary set in place. One of the hardest parts was taking over Dad's medical bills entirely myself, but doing it without Mom's knowledge. She had grown comfortable delegating all the logistical and financial details to me, while she maintained the role of the nurturing matriarch who kept the family image intact. I realized that if I continued letting her handle it, she'd keep using me as a resource without accountability. So, quietly, I opened a separate account to pay for Dad's ongoing medical expenses, transferred enough funds to cover his prescriptions, doctor visits, and therapies, and relieved Mom of those responsibilities, at least on paper. It was a deliberate move to cut off her indirect control and protect Dad's care from any further mismanagement. Of course, I still managed the actual payments and paperwork, but I documented everything carefully, knowing that evidence was my ally. To safeguard myself further, I changed all the passwords on the shared family financial accounts. Previously, Mom and Sarah had access to some of these accounts, which made it easy for them to withdraw funds or request transfers without my immediate knowledge. Locking down access was a practical step to prevent any more unauthorized spending or financial surprises. I notified Mom and Sarah only after the changes were done, framing it as a routine security update. Their reactions were muted, but telling. Mom's usual charm faltered for a moment, and Sarah's face tightened, a flicker of something like panic crossing her features. I also froze discretionary funds that I had previously set aside for family use. This was money earmarked for vacations, gifts, or shared expenses that Sarah and Mom had come to expect as a given. Now, those funds were off limits until I felt the family's attitude shifted toward respect and accountability. I wasn't cutting them off completely, but I was signaling clearly that their entitlement would no longer go unchecked. Throughout all this, I maintained the facade of calm politeness. At family dinners, I smiled and shared pleasantries. On calls that weren't about money, I engaged warmly. It was important they didn't see the storm brewing beneath the surface. I wanted to watch and measure how long they could go without my usual support before cracks showed. It was a test of their true dependence on me. But beneath this exterior, I was documenting every interaction meticulously. Every text from Sarah asking for money, every passive-aggressive comment from Mom, every excuse or failed promise was logged and time-stamped. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about holding them accountable for years of exploitation and emotional neglect. Even Daniel noticed the change. One evening, as I closed my laptop after updating the ledger of recent family expenses I'd declined, he reached over and squeezed my hand. "How are you holding up?" he asked softly. I smiled tiredly, but nodded, steadier than before. "It's just finally standing up for what's mine." His support was a quiet anchor in the shifting tides. I knew this subtle withdrawal wouldn't go unnoticed for long. The family was used to having me as their financial safety net, their crisis manager, their invisible accountant. The moment I stopped being the one to fix everything, the pressure would build. But for the first time in years, I was ready to feel that pressure, to let their discomfort be the signal that change was needed. And so, day by day, as I declined requests, avoided manipulative calls, quietly took control of Dad's bills, and locked down financial access, I was setting a new boundary, a line drawn in the sand that only I could draw. The family's comfortable assumptions were being challenged. The safety net was being pulled away. And I waited, watching closely for the moment when the cracks would start to show. The next family meeting was a carefully staged affair, held in the same dining room where so many years of unspoken tensions had simmered beneath the surface. The warm glow of the chandelier cast long shadows over faces I knew all too well, each carrying a history of favors taken for granted, betrayals unspoken, and resentments quietly buried. I arrived with Daniel beside me, his reassuring presence like a steady hand on my back. I could feel the familiar eyes of Mom and Sarah sizing me up, expecting the usual placating nods and gentle smiles. But this time, I wasn't here to keep the peace. I was here to reclaim my story. The table was laden with dishes that everyone had brought, a symbol of our family's attempt to maintain tradition and unity. But tonight, the food felt heavier, weighed down by the unspoken truths I was about to lay bare. I took a deep breath, steadying myself as the room hummed with casual chatter. Then, when the moment felt right, I spoke, not loudly, but firmly, with the calm precision that 15 years as a forensic accountant had ingrained in me. "Sarah," I began, locking eyes with my sister, "I've decided to cut off all financial support." My voice was steady, but inside my heart pounded like a warning drum. I could see the flicker of shock register across her face, a subtle tightening of her jaw as if she were trying to process a truth she had long preferred to ignore. I paused, letting the weight of those words settle before continuing. "And I've removed you from my will." The room went deathly silent. Even the usual hum of conversation died down to a suffocating stillness. I watched as Sarah's expression shifted, from disbelief to a mask of cold composure. Her eyes darted toward Mom, who sat frozen, her lips pressed tightly together, the carefully constructed matriarch facade faltering under the pressure. I could feel Dad's gaze on me, strained and uncertain. He swallowed hard, his fingers tightening around the napkin in his lap. The tension was palpable, as if the air itself had thickened with unspoken accusations and long-buried frustrations finally spilling over. But I wasn't finished. "For years," I said, voice unwavering, "I've quietly funded your lifestyle, covering your wedding, your emergencies, your debts. I've been the invisible lender, the family's safety net. And yet, none of it has been acknowledged. None of it has been repaid. This isn't just about money. It's about respect and accountability." The words hit harder than I expected. I saw Sarah's confident smirk vanish completely, replaced by a pale, tight-lipped semblance of control. She avoided meeting my gaze, her hands clenched tightly on the table. Mom's eyes flicked away, unable to meet the truth I was laying bare. Even the cousins and aunts, usually so absorbed in their own chatter, were staring now, the room buzzing with silent shock. Daniel squeezed my hand under the table, a reminder that I wasn't alone in this confrontation. His quiet support was a lifeline, steadying me as the room's atmosphere shifted from disbelief to panic. I continued, more firmly now. "And it's not just Sarah. Mom's mismanagement of Dad's medical funds and her refusal to acknowledge the strain it has placed on me is no longer something I can tolerate. I've taken over the financial responsibility for Dad's care, not because it's expected, but because I care deeply. But that care does not come with endless exploitation. I saw Mom's face tighten. The charming mask she wore so effortlessly cracked, revealing a flicker of panic that unsettled the room's delicate balance. She opened her mouth, perhaps to protest, but no words came. "I'm setting clear boundaries," I stated, locking eyes with both Mom and Sarah. "Either there is respect and accountability moving forward, or there will be permanent distance. I'm done being the invisible bank, the unpaid caretaker, the overlooked daughter." The silence stretched out, thick and uncomfortable. Sarah's nails tapped nervously against her glass. Mom's hands trembled slightly, a rare crack in her composure. Dad looked away, the lines of years of avoidance etched on his face. Then, just as the room seemed it might burst from the tension, Mom cleared her throat, her voice tight and brittle. "Tessa, this isn't how families handle things." I cut her off gently but firmly. "Maybe it's time we handled things differently," I said, "because what we've been doing isn't working." The moment hung there, fragile and raw. The perfect veneer of our family gathering shattered, revealing the fractures I had long felt but never voiced. The truth was out now, laid bare in the quiet gravity of my words. I had stepped out from the shadows, no longer willing to carry their burdens silently. And as the room absorbed the weight of that revelation, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. But the story was far from over. The walls I had breached tonight invited inevitable reactions. The confrontation, the fallout, the reckoning. I had opened the door. Now I had to be ready for what would come through it. The moments after I dropped the bombshell were electric with silence. But silence doesn't last in families like mine. Soon, the fallout began, and it was far messier than I'd anticipated. The first sign came with unpaid bills piling up. Without my steady hand managing the accounts, deadlines slipped by unnoticed. Creditors started calling, their voices tinged with impatience. Sarah's name popped up on every overdue notice, a glaring indicator that the financial safety net I'd woven for her was unraveling in real time. I had braced myself for some backlash, but what caught me off guard was Sarah's social circle noticing the shift. Invitations she used to receive to dinners, events, and weekend getaways started drying up. Friends I'd barely met would whisper in passing, exchanging curious glances. People began asking subtle questions. "Is everything okay with Sarah? She's been laying low lately." It was almost surreal to witness the ripple effects of my withdrawal, not just in numbers on a ledger, but in the social fabric Sarah had so carefully curated. Her glossy image was cracking, and I could see the panic lurking just beneath her polished exterior. Meanwhile, Mom's response was a combination of calculated guilt-tripping and veiled manipulation. Her calls started coming more frequently, always carrying that same sweet tone layered with expectation. "Tess, darling, can't you find it in your heart to help just a little longer? We're family, after all." I could almost hear the unshed tears in her voice, the practiced vulnerability designed to tug at my conscience. But this time, I didn't flinch. I reminded her gently but firmly that I had set boundaries, that my support was contingent on respect and accountability. The guilt trips were met with calm refusals, not the usual desperate acquiescence. Sarah, on the other hand, lashed out with frustration and entitlement. Her texts and calls escalated from polite requests into sharp accusations. "How can you do this to me? You're supposed to be family," she wrote one evening, the words dripping with wounded pride. "You're ruining everything." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I let her messages sit, unread, while I gathered my resolve. Daniel, ever supportive, cautioned me gently, "Brace yourself. This might get worse before it gets better." And he was right. The family storm was only gathering strength. Daniel's phone started ringing almost non-stop, in-laws desperate to understand what was happening, trying to mediate or manipulate from their end. He found himself caught in a web of conflicting loyalties, torn between supporting me and keeping peace with his extended family. I could see the toll it took on him, but his steadfast presence was my anchor through the chaos. Outside our immediate family, whispers began spreading. Extended relatives who once admired Mom's matriarchal command started doubting her favoritism, Quiet conversations at family gatherings hinted at a growing awareness that the Butler family's polished image was more fragile than anyone admitted. The golden child facade Sarah wore so effortlessly was losing its luster under the weight of financial strain and fractured relationships. Through it all, I remained resolute. The unpaid bills, the freezing of credit lines, the social distancing, it was all part of the consequence I'd expected, the inevitable price for breaking a cycle of exploitation. I knew the family would panic without my financial safety net, but for the first time, that panic was not mine to soothe. I watched from a distance as the structure they relied on crumbled, feeling a complicated mix of vindication and sadness. The family scrambled to keep things afloat without me laid bare how much I had been carrying, and how they had taken it for granted. My silence was no longer a refuge. It was a boundary, a statement, a declaration that the old ways were over. But even as the fallout intensified, I sensed this was only the beginning. The cracks were showing, and how they chose to respond next would determine the shape of the family's future and where I stood within it. The mounting pressure was palpable, like a storm-gathering force just beyond the horizon, ready to break loose in ways none of us could fully predict. Sarah's world, once so carefully curated and seemingly unstoppable, was beginning to crumble under the weight of the financial reality I had quietly imposed simply by stepping back. The foreclosure notices arrived without fanfare. Just impersonal letters slipped into the mailbox, their stark language a brutal contrast to the social charm Sarah once wielded so effortlessly. I saw how the threats of losing her home gnawed at her once unshakable confidence. The house she'd proudly shown off at gatherings, the place where she hosted dinners and parties, was suddenly a symbol of vulnerability no one had expected. The social isolation was an equally cruel consequence. Invitations that had once flowed freely now stopped coming. Sarah's usual circle of friends seemed to shrink overnight, and rumors began to whisper through the grapevine at family functions and community events. People who once fawned over her success now looked away, their glances a mixture of pity and curiosity. The vibrant social life she so relished was peeling away, revealing a stark loneliness beneath. It was a painful transformation to witness, and though part of me felt vindicated, another part grieved the loss of the sister I once hoped we could be. Mom's reaction was a study in controlled desperation. Her calls became more frequent, each one carefully crafted to sound caring, yet laced with subtle demands. "Tess, darling," she'd begin, voice smooth but edged with urgency. "We're all family here. Surely you can help just a little longer. This is just a rough patch." But I was no longer swayed by her rehearsed appeals. I answered gently but firmly, "Mom, I've set my boundaries. I can no longer support them without respect." Her voice would falter for a moment, then she'd muster a sigh, attempting to mask the panic that I could hear lurking beneath her composed tone. It was like watching a matriarch losing her grip on the carefully constructed empire she'd built on favoritism and control. Sarah's responses were far less composed. As the financial strain tightened its grip, her texts shifted from polite pleas to sharp accusations, laced with entitlement and hurt pride. "How could you do this to me?" she demanded in one message, the words dripping with betrayal. "I'm your sister. This isn't just about money. It's about family. You're tearing us apart." I read her messages late at night, the frustration in her words echoing years of unspoken tensions. But I no longer responded with excuses or apologies. Instead, I let silence be my reply, a deliberate void signaling that I was no longer available to be the safety net she had long taken for granted. Meanwhile, Daniel found himself caught in the eye of the family storm. His phone rang constantly, relatives desperate for explanations, mediation, or favors, calls from in-laws, whispers of support for Sarah, and veiled criticisms of me all converged in a relentless tide. He was torn between loyalty to me and the pressure from his extended family, a balancing act that drained him more than he let on. Yet, his unwavering support for me never faltered. On quiet evenings, he'd sit beside me, offering steady reassurance. "We'll get through this," he'd say softly, grounding me when the family chaos threatened to overwhelm. Outside our immediate circle, the family's polished image began to crack, Quiet conversations erupted at community gatherings and among extended relatives who once admired Mom's command with unquestioning respect. Whispers circulated about the Butler family's dysfunction, questions about favoritism, financial mismanagement, and the true nature of their relationships. The myth of the golden child Sarah had worn so effortlessly was unmasking itself, revealing a fragile foundation built on dependency and entitlement. Through all this upheaval, I held fast to my resolve. The unpaid bills, the frozen credit lines, the social fracture. It was all part of a reckoning long overdue. I watched as the family scrambled to adjust without the financial and emotional scaffolding I had provided for years. It was a complex feeling, a mix of vindication, sorrow, and a cautious hope that this might finally be the turning point. But even as the consequences spiraled outward, I knew this was only the beginning. The cracks were widening, and the family's next moves would define not only their future, but mine as well. I had drawn a line in the sand, and now I was waiting, watching to see who would step over it, who would retreat, and who would finally understand that respect and accountability were not optional. The story was far from over, and the path ahead was uncertain, but I felt stronger than I had in years. This was my stand, my moment, and I was ready to face whatever came next. The Butlers now faced a reality that could no longer be ignored, a reckoning born from years of entitlement, neglect, and willful blindness. The comfortable dynamics that had long allowed favoritism and exploitation to flourish were unraveling, thread by thread. Our family's carefully maintained image of harmony was cracking, and with each fracture came uncomfortable truths that refused to be hidden any longer. That evening, I sat quietly with Daniel after the latest family meeting, a moment heavy with tension and unspoken questions. The air between us was calm, but I could feel the weight of what had shifted. For years, I'd carried the financial burdens, the silent resentments, and the emotional exhaustion alone. Now, I was no longer willing to be the invisible crutch propping up a system that ignored my dignity and worth. I had laid down clear terms for what would come next: mutual respect, honesty, and accountability. These weren't empty requests, but fundamental boundaries, a framework on which any future relationship would have to rest, or else dissolve into permanent distance. It wasn't a choice I relished making, but it was necessary. The years of one-sided sacrifice had taught me the hard truth. Love without respect is a hollow thing, and family ties stretched only so far before they snap. Mom, who once held the family in a magnetic grip, now looked fragile beneath her practiced charm. The matriarch's facade showed cracks, moments when her eyes flickered with uncertainty or defensiveness. Her attempts at guilt-tripping fell flat against the wall I built from years of evidence and newly asserted boundaries. She learned that her influence could no longer manipulate me into silence or submission. Sarah, stripped of my financial support and faced with the consequences of long-ignored debts, was forced to confront a lifestyle she'd long taken for granted. The social privileges she enjoyed slipped through her fingers like sand, exposing a vulnerability hidden beneath her polished exterior. Our once casual, unbalanced interactions transformed into uncomfortable silences and strained conversations. The entitlement that had cloaked her actions began to dissolve, revealing the rawness beneath. Dad, the quiet observer, was caught in the crossfire of shifting allegiances and family fractures. His health, which had always been a source of silent concern, now felt entwined with the emotional upheaval. I took on his medical finances with renewed focus, determined to shield him from further chaos, while also protecting myself from being drawn back into the old patterns of unacknowledged labor. Daniel stood by me as a steady presence, his support unwavering even when the ripple effects of this family storm threatened to pull us under. He reminded me gently on tough days that my worth was not tied to others' recognition, but rooted in the integrity with which I claimed my life and boundaries. His quiet strength was the balm I needed when old wounds reopened and doubt crept in. Outside our home, the Butler family's polished reputation began to erode. Whispers at community events and extended family gatherings carried an undercurrent of skepticism and doubt. The myth of the golden child and the untouchable matriarch was no longer absolute. Conversations hinted at favoritism, financial improprieties, and emotional neglect, truths long buried beneath years of smiles and staged photographs. Yet, amidst all this upheaval, I found unexpected clarity and peace. The storm unsettled everything familiar, but it also cleared space for something new: authenticity, accountability, and the possibility of relationships built on mutual respect rather than obligation. I realized that family is not simply defined by blood or shared history. It is shaped by trust, dignity, and the willingness to see and honor one another fully. I offered my family a choice: meet me on this new ground, where respect and honesty are non-negotiable, or accept that distance may be the only way forward. This stand wasn't about punishment. It was about survival and self-preservation after years of invisibility. As I reflect on this journey, I recognize how much strength it has taken to step out of the shadows and demand the recognition I deserve. The path ahead remains uncertain, with fragile hearts and fractured ties still to mend or sever. But for the first time in a long time, I feel whole, grounded in the knowledge that my worth cannot be measured by others' favoritism or neglect. I've learned that peace isn't found in silent sacrifice or hoping for change that never comes. It's found in setting boundaries, demanding respect, and surrounding yourself with those who truly see your value. And with Daniel by my side, our children growing up in a home where love isn't conditional on approval or indebtedness, I am finally free to be the woman I've always been: whole, respected, and unapologetically me. The family's reckoning is theirs to navigate now. I've done my part. I've spoken my truth, drawn my lines, and reclaimed my space. The next chapter of our story remains unwritten, but whatever it holds, I know this: I will no longer be invisible. I am here, I am seen, and I will not settle for anything less than the respect and love I deserve.